Xylos Prime, a jewel amongst the night worlds, had always prided itself on its unwavering fealty to the Imperium and the impeccable honor of House Varus. For millennia, the planet's vast agridomes fed entire star systems. Its orbital shipyards churned out vital void craft, and its towering night suits, clad in the azure and gold of Varus, had crushed countless threats to humanity. Yet even in such a bastion of strength, the galaxy's cruel indifference found purchase, insidiously creeping into the heart of their world. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as aberrations, or the stresses of an ongoing low-intensity border conflict with an aggressive orc wog. A night pilot, Sir Kalen Varus, experienced waking nightmares within the hallowed confines of his cockpit. The machine spirit of his Cerastus Night Castigator, named Oathsworn, reportedly whispering untruths to him. Medics attributed it to battle fatigue, the rigors of piloting such a formidable war engine, and administered sedatives. The whispers, however, persisted, growing louder, more insistent, even as Sir Kalen was grounded for observation. Then came the mechanical failures, anomalies that defied explanation. Servitors maintaining the night hangars reported odd fluctuations in diagnostic readouts. The sacred oils used to lubricate joints seemed to congeal prematurely, and the arcane chants of the tech priests of the Collegia Titanica resonated with an uncharacteristic dissonance as they tried to placate what they described as restless machine spirits. These incidents, isolated at first, soon coalesced into a disturbing pattern. A night paladin, Indomitus Might, engaged in routine training maneuvers, suddenly veered off course, its pilot screaming incomprehensible gibberish over the Vox net before the colossal war machine opened fire on an empty sector of the training grounds, tearing through centuries-old defensive emplacements. The pilot was later found catatonic, eyes wide with terror, muttering about the great hunger and unbinding thoughts. Lord Baron Theron Varus, the venerable patriarch of the house, initially attributed these events to sabotage, perhaps a cunning orc ploy, or a Xylos infiltrator. He ordered rigorous investigations, increased security, and convened the High Council of Varus, his face etched with concern, but still firm in his conviction that the honor of his house would prevail. Yet even as he spoke of vigilance, the plague deepened its roots. The whispers were no longer confined to the pilots. They began to spread amongst the lesser nobility, the retainers, even the tech priests themselves. Dreams became vivid, unsettling tapestries of distorted geometries and ancient, alien hungers. Individuals reported profound shifts in mood, episodes of irrational rage or debilitating melancholy, often accompanied by headaches that felt like miniature storm fronts raging behind their eyes. The true horror began when the knights themselves started to turn. Not just pilots losing their minds within the cockpit, but the very machine spirits, the revered, conscious entities imbued within the adamantium and ceramite frames, seemed to warp. During a ceremonial parade, a squadron of armiger warglaves, their pilots strapped securely into their throne mechanicum, suddenly shuddered. Their plasma incinerators, meant for demonstration fire, rotated with a sickening lurch, locking onto the reviewing stand where Lord Baron Theron and his family stood. Only the swift, desperate action of loyal household guards, throwing themselves in front of the weapons, prevented a massacre, but not before the plasma blasts incinerated a score of veteran guardsmen and scorched the ancient Varus banner. The pilots of the rogue armigers were found dead in their thrones, their brains having hemorrhaged, yet a twisted, defiant grin was frozen on each face. The machine spirits, however, remained active, fighting fiercely as if possessed, even without their pilots. They moved with a disturbing, erratic grace, their usual stately strides replaced by lurching, predatory movements. Panic began to set in. The planet's astropaths, usually a beacon of psychic calm, were overwhelmed. Their once clear channels to the wider Imperium became a cacophony of agony, fear, and a strange, rhythmic, psychic pulse that seemed to beat from the very heart of Xylos Prime. Most of the astropaths succumbed, their minds fracturing under the strain, their last gasps filled with screams of, "It consumes!" and "The silence breaks." Only a few, the most resilient, managed to send out a desperate, garbled plea for aid before their own minds, too, were claimed. The distress call, a fragmented symphony of terror, and a barely discernible mention of machines turning, minds ablaze, and a creeping hunger, was sent on a flickering, dying frequency. A desperate prayer hurled into the cold, uncaring void. It was a plea for any intervention, a cry for salvation from a horror that was devouring Xylos Prime from within, transforming its proud defenders into grotesque instruments of its own destruction. "The Emperor protects," they whispered, but the whispers that answered were not of the master of mankind. They were ancient, hungry, and utterly devoid of mercy. The fragmented scream from Xylos Prime, a dying shriek of terror and confusion, did not register as a coherent plea in the minds of the galaxy's myriad psychers. Instead, it tore through the ether, a raw, primal wound in the immaterium. A discordant chord struck so violently that it resonated even within the hallowed, silent chambers of the vigil of the silent blades of Athame. This particular vigil, one of the more elusive and grimly purposeful detachments of the sisterhood, maintained a constant, almost spectral presence on the fringes of Segmentum Obscurus, ever vigilant against the psychic abominations that festered in the galaxy's darkest corners. Their flagship, the Nullification's Edge, a sleek, black spear of a vessel cloaked in esoteric psychic dampeners, felt the dying thrum of Xylos Prime not as a thought, but as a pressure. To the unaugmented crew, it was a momentary ripple in the ship's sensorium, a fleeting ghost in the machine. But to the sisters, the Null Maidens, it was a sudden, violent tearing of the veil, a momentary absence of the usual background static of sentient life that normally hummed beneath their awareness. For them, the universe was not truly silent. Rather, it was a vast, echoing chamber where the psychic exhalations of billions of souls created a constant, if distant, murmur. When that murmur was abruptly and violently silenced, replaced by a gaping, raw void, it was akin to a deafening silence. Within the austere, obsidian-lined command bridge of the Nullification's Edge, Commander Valerius Kale stood sentinel. Her power armor, custom-fitted and devoid of the usual imperial iconography, save for the subtle aquila etched into the ceramite, was a deeper, matte black than most, blending perfectly with the shadows cast by the ship's minimalist lighting. Her face, framed by the stark white of her closely cropped hair, was a study in grim determination. Scarred, unsmiling, her eyes, the color of frozen mercury, scanned the tactical displays with an unnerving intensity. Valerius was not a woman of many words, not just by virtue of her vow of silence, but by nature. Her communication was through precise gestures, subtle shifts in posture, and an almost preternatural understanding of her sister's intentions, forged in countless campaigns against horrors that screamed from the warp. She had felt the abrupt, violent silence, the rending of the psychic fabric, more acutely than many of her sisters. A faint tremor, a ghost of a chill, had traced its way along her spine, a sensation she rarely experienced. This was not the familiar emptiness she projected, nor the quiet void she inhabited. This was a devouring silence, a hunger that swallowed souls whole. It spoke of a psychic entity of immense, ancient power, one that warped not just minds, but the very essence of existence. The ship's automated vox casters, designed to filter all but the most critical data, had picked up the garbled distress call, a faint, struggling transmission that died as quickly as it came. The navigators, those unfortunate souls whose gift allowed them to guide the ship through the terrifying currents of the warp, were in a state of controlled agony. Though the sisters' null aura mitigated much of their suffering, even the distant echoes of Xylos Prime's psychic torment caused their third eyes to weep blood, their minds reeling from the reverberations of what they described as a gnawing maw in the ether. A night world, Valerius's chief sister vigilant, Saria, communicated through precise hand signs. A house Varos, their astropathic chorus, ceased. Valerius nodded slowly, the motion barely perceptible. Night worlds were vital to the Imperium, their loyalty and military might invaluable. For such a bastion to fall to a psychic blight was deeply unsettling, hinting at a threat far beyond conventional warfare. The fact that the call mentioned machines turning and minds ablaze indicated a foe that targeted the very connection between man and machine, a sacred bond on a night world. The vigil of the silent blades of Atham specialized in the eradication of psychic incursions, where conventional imperial forces, even the mightiest psychers of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, would be overwhelmed or corrupted. They were scalpels against psychic cancer, their very presence a searing blade against the warp's influence. This mission, however, felt different. The mention of machine spirits being corrupted suggested a malevolence that seeped into the very fabric of matter, a level of spiritual pollution that was rare and terrifying. The nullification's edge shifted course, its Geller field shimmering into full operational capacity, creating a momentary, almost palpable tension as the ship prepared to pierce the veil. The voyage itself was a descent into a deepening silence for the sisters. As they drew closer to Xylos Prime, the subtle noise of the galaxy, the distant hum of countless lives, began to fade, replaced by a profound, oppressive emptiness. It was not the serene void of their own creation, but a violent, consuming negation. It was as if Xylos Prime was a gaping maw, sucking all psychic energy, all conscious thought, into its hungry core. Inside the ship, the atmosphere became even more somber, if such a thing were possible. The air seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deeper. Even the servitors, usually immune to such psychic emanations, exhibited subtle glitches, their cogitators occasionally sputtering, their movements becoming momentarily erratic. The sisters, however, remained resolute. Their training, their very essence, was forged in such oppressive psychic environments. Their null fields, far from being a burden, were their shield, their weapon, and their sanctuary. Yet, even they could feel the pressure, a sensation akin to standing on the precipice of a vast, unseen abyss, where the air itself was trying to crush them. The journey passed in a blur of silent readiness. Weapons were checked, armor systems purged and reactivated, prayer scripturals reaffirmed in the hushed, sterile light of the armories. Each sister knew the gravity of their mission. To face a psychic plague that turned the very war machines of humanity against their masters was to face a corruption of the most fundamental kind. It was not merely about purging heretics or slaying demons. It was about reclaiming the sanctity of the machine itself, a task that bordered on the theological. As the nullification's edge broke through the final void shrouds and into the Xylos prime system, the scene that greeted them was one of desolation. From high orbit, the planet's once vibrant agridomes were scarred and broken. Vast swaths of verdant green replaced by cauterized black and dust-choked gray. Orbital defense platforms, once glittering sentinels, hung twisted and inert, silent memorials to a battle lost. What little comms traffic remained was a desperate, chaotic babble, not even a coherent plea, but just raw, unadulterated fear. And beneath it all, Valerius could feel it. The crushing, pervasive silence, the true testament to the devastation wrought by the psychic plague. It was a silence that screamed louder than any mortal wail, a cold, hungry emptiness that promised an all-consuming void. "Prepare for planetary deployment," Valerius communicated via direct command link to her vigil. Her voice, if she were to speak it, would be a jarring sound, alien and guttural. But her intent was clear. The time for silent contemplation was over. The time for action, for the grim work of the silent sisterhood, had begun. Xylos Prime was dying, choked by a psychic horror. And only the null maidens, those who walked in the cold embrace of the true silence, could hope to stem the tide. The nullification's edge pierced the toxic upper atmosphere of Xylos Prime like a black dagger descending into the planet's ravaged flesh. Even from orbit, the scars of the psychic plague were visible, immense craters where night lances had surely clashed with corrupted brethren. Entire urban sprawls reduced to shattered husks, and the once pristine agridomes now gaping wounds, spilling nutrient paste and dead flora across the landscape. As the gunship lighters deployed from the flagship's belly, skimming low through the perpetual twilight, the sisters observed a world choked by its own demise. The initial landing zone, a designated orbital pad near the remnants of what was once a prosperous manufacturing district, was a scene of apocalyptic desolation. Twisted girders reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. Colossal machines lay toppled and burnt, and the air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone, burnt plastic, and something else, something indefinable, an acrid scent of psychic decay that even the sisters, lacking a psychic sense, could perceive as a crushing weight on the air. No welcoming party, no desperate resistance force, only the whistling wind carrying dust and the faint, unsettling groans of tortured metal. As the gunship's ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, Commander Valerius Kyle stepped out first, her bolter held at the ready, its muzzle compensator gleaming dully. Behind her, a full vigil of silent blades followed, their boots crunching on rubble and shattered ceramite. Their null auras immediately began to push back the psychic oppression, creating a small pocket of relative calm, a stark contrast to the palpable dread that permeated the rest of the planet. For the unaugmented Imperial Navy crew who had flown them down, the sudden relief was almost dizzying, like escaping from an airless vault into a fresh, if still polluted, breeze. The first survivors they encountered were a scattered band of Varu's household guardsmen, huddled in the ruins of a collapsed hab block, their faces gaunt, eyes wide with a terror that transcended mere fear of death. They were not screaming. They were silent, their voices choked by an invisible hand. Valerius, communicating through her usual precise gestures and the unique silent language of the sisterhood, conveyed their purpose. The guardsmen, initially wary of the silent, imposing figures, quickly recognized the Aquila of the Emperor and the grim determination in their bearing. Their relief when they realized these silent warriors were here to fight the unseen enemy was almost heartbreaking. One of the guardsmen, a grizzled veteran whose uniform bore the scorch marks of a close-quarters plasma blast, pointed a trembling hand towards the horizon. The keep. The Lord Baron. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, as if he feared the very act of speaking would draw unseen attention. It's worse there. The machines, they come alive. The sisters moved with practiced efficiency. Their first priority was assessment. They established a temporary forward operating base amidst the ruins, a silent bastion against the psychic tides. Valerius deployed scouts to ascertain the immediate threats and locate the main stronghold of House Varus. The sisters moved like wraiths through the broken cityscapes, their enhanced senses picking up subtle disturbances that would be imperceptible to baseline humans. They heard the shuddering groan of distant, colossal footsteps, the grinding of gears, the whine of plasma generators, sounds that spoke of active night suits. But these sounds were subtly wrong, imbued with an underlying rhythm that was both mechanical and unnervingly organic, a pulse of malevolence. It didn't take long for them to encounter their first corrupted night. A lone armiger, warglaive, its once proud azure and gold livery chipped and streaked with crimson, lumbered into view from behind a colossal, toppled manufacturing crane. Its plasma incinerator glowed with an erratic, dangerous intensity, and its thermal spear was trailed by residual heat haze. The most chilling aspect, however, was its movement. It walked with a jerky, almost spasmodic gait, not the smooth, practiced elegance of a war machine piloted by a skilled noble, but a lurching, predatory shuffle, like a wounded beast sensing prey. Its pilot cockpit was visibly shattered, the mangled remnants of the throne mechanicum exposed, yet the night continued its patrol. Valerius raised a hand, halting her vigil. She observed the rogue knight through the advanced optics of her helmet, its data streams flowing directly into her mind interlink. No pilot. The machine spirit itself was animated, but not in the way tech priests understood. This was not the awakened consciousness of a dormant machine, but a tortured, maddened entity driven by some unseen force. The warglaive stopped, its sensor array sweeping erratically before locking onto the sisters' position. It wasn't seeing them with optical sensors, Valerius realized with a cold certainty. It was sensing them, not psychically, but through some perverse, distorted echo of that ability. The null field of the sisters, instead of blinding it, seemed to provoke it. With a guttural shriek of tortured servos that sounded less like machinery and more like a monstrous roar, the warglaive charged. Its plasma incinerator sputtered, then roared to life, unleashing a torrent of superheated energy that tore through the ruins, melting ferrocrete and vaporizing debris. The sisters moved with impossible speed, dissolving into flanking positions, their bolters spitting controlled bursts of explosive rounds that hammered against the night ceramite plating, chipping it, but doing little to slow its advance. Valerius signaled a pincer movement. Two squads of witch-seekers, their executioner greatswords humming with energy, moved to engage the corrupted armiger in close quarters, aiming for vulnerable joints and sensor clusters. The warglaive, however, fought with a savage, almost suicidal ferocity. Its thermal spear swept in wide, devastating arcs, forcing the sisters to employ their incredible agility and close-quarters combat training to avoid being incinerated. Its massive feet stomped and crushed, threatening to pulverize them. But the silent sisterhood were not mere soldiers. They were anti-psychers, honed killers of the unseen. As the witch-seekers closed, their null auras washing over the night, the effect was profound. The warglave's erratic movements became even more frenzied, its weapon fire less accurate, as if its maddened machine spirit was screaming in torment, its connection to its unseen master being partially severed by the sheer negation. One Sister Seeker, Sister Vigilant Maeve, expertly dodged a sweeping thermal spear, then plunged her humming executioner blade deep into the warglave's knee joint, tearing through servo motors and auxiliary power conduits. The knight shuddered, its leg buckling, its shriek of mechanical agony echoing across the devastated landscape. Another sister, positioned on a ruined overpass, targeted the knight's main sensor array with a focused volley of bolter fire, shattering its optical components. Blinded and partially crippled, the warglaive thrashed, turning its plasma incinerator wildly, until Valerius herself, having flanked the beast, plunged her own power sword into the exposed hydraulic lines of its neck, severing the connection to its main weapon arm. With a final, shuddering groan, the corrupted machine collapsed, its plasma incinerator flickering and dying, its thermal spear growing cold. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of residual energy and the sister's heavy breathing. The pilot of the warglaive was indeed long dead, his corpse desiccated and fused to the throne mechanicum, consumed not by the physical battle, but by the psychic blight. Valerius surveyed the downed knight, her gaze distant. This was not merely a mechanical failure, nor a possessed demon engine. This was something far more insidious. The very essence of the machine, its proud and revered spirit, had been twisted, corrupted, driven to madness without the need for a physical pilot. The true enemy, she realized with a chilling certainty, was not just the plague in the minds of men, but a deeper, more ancient horror that could bend and break the souls of the machines themselves. Xylos Prime was not just dying. It was becoming a graveyard where even the hallowed machine spirits were forced to scream their last, silent agony. The first encounter with the corrupted Armiger warglaive was a brutal awakening for the silent blades of Athame. It confirmed their gravest suspicions. This was not merely a case of demon possession or conventional psychic manipulation. This was a deeper, more fundamental perversion, reaching into the very core of a machine's being. Commander Valerius Kale stood over the downed knight, her mercury-like eyes tracing the intricate lines of its internal architecture, now exposed and mangled. The air around the shattered war machine felt heavy, not with the typical psychic residue of a battle, but with a profound, almost tangible malevolence, a residue of torment. The pilot was merely a conduit, Valerius conveyed to her accompanying sisters through the nuanced language of their gestures, her hand moving with swift, economic precision. The blight sought the machine. It found purchase within the spirit itself. The discovery was unsettling. The sisters were accustomed to purging psychic infestations from organic life, severing warp-born entities from their mortal anchors. But the machine spirits of the Imperium's war engines were revered, enigmatic entities, more akin to sentient AI than mere automatons, their consciousness a blend of arcane programming, emperor-given sanctity, and the reverence of the tech priests. To corrupt such a thing was an act of profound heresy, a blasphemy against the very tenets of the machine god. Valerius dispatched a team of sisters to meticulously dissect the fallen warglaive, seeking any physical manifestation of the psychic plague, any clue to its nature. Meanwhile, the rest of the vigil pressed onward, following the directions of the rescued Varus guardsmen towards the main Varus keep. Their journey through the ruined districts of the planetary capital was a grim odyssey. The further they delved, the more pervasive the psychic oppression became. Even with their null auras, the sisters felt the constant, insidious pressure, like a weight pressing down on their very souls, a persistent whisper of wrongness that grated against their anathemic nature. They encountered more corrupted knights, often in grotesque tableaus of destruction. A Questoris Knight Paladin, unyielding fury, had apparently torn itself apart, its massive chainsword embedded deep within its own chest cavity, its thermal cannon melted from internal overload. Another, a knight-errant named Vanguard of Dawn, stood motionless, half buried in the ruins of a hab block, its cockpit hatch blown open, revealing a desiccated pilot. Yet its armaments still hummed, and its vox emitters played an endless, maddening loop of distorted imperial battle hymns, interspersed with guttural alien shrieks. Each dormant night was a monument to the plague's destructive power, a chilling testament to the madness that gripped Xylos Prime. The remaining loyalist forces of House Varus were found barricaded within the core of the main Varus keep, a colossal fortress palace that had stood for millennia. Its ancient adamantium walls, scarred but unbowed by countless skirmishes, were now besieged by an enemy more terrifying than any orc or heretic, their own brethren, their own war machines, twisted into instruments of terror. The sisters approached the keep's outer perimeter to a scene of desperate resistance. Flashes of laser fire and the roar of bolters erupted from the crenellated battlements. directed at the hulking shapes of corrupted knights slowly advancing through the shattered landscape. A loyalist, knight gallant, honors Aegis, its pilot, a grizzled Varus noble, engaged a corrupted knight crusader, Judgment's wrath, in a brutal, ceramite-rending duel. The loyalist knight moved with precision and skill, but the corrupted crusader fought with a mindless, relentless fury, heedless of damage. Its avenger Gatling cannon spitting a hail of shells, its melt-a-gun searing through Honor's Aegis's shielding. Valerius ordered her vigil to intervene, their bolters and psychic dampeners immediately impacting the corrupted crusader. Under the sudden, overwhelming pressure of the null field, the crusader staggered, its movements becoming even more frenzied, its weapon fire spraying wildly. The pilot of Honor's Aegis, momentarily relieved of the psychic burden, seized the opportunity, driving his chainsword deep into the corrupted knight's main power conduit, bringing the hulking war machine crashing down in a shower of sparks and dying groans. The gate of the keep opened cautiously, revealing Lord Baron Theron Varus himself, flanked by his remaining household guard. The old baron was a picture of aristocratic despair. His face, usually a mask of imperial dignity, was now etched with profound grief and exhaustion. His eyes haunted. He stared at the silent sisters, his gaze filled with a mixture of desperate hope and profound trepidation. He had heard of the Null Maidens, the Emperor's psychic suppressors, but to see them in the flesh was another matter entirely. Their very presence was a palpable absence, a void that made the air around them feel thinner, colder. "You are the Silent Sisters," Lord Baron Theron rasped, his voice raw. He had expected the grand imperial army, the Legiones Astartes, perhaps even the Inquisition, but not this silent, ominous vanguard. "We sent a plea, a desperate cry for aid. We did not know if it would reach anyone." Valerius, through gestures translated by a kneeling sister translator who projected the words directly into Theron's mind, confirmed their identity and purpose. The Emperor protects through many hands. We are here to cleanse the blight. Lord Baron Theron led them into the keep, its interior a grim testament to the siege. Makeshift barricades were everywhere, wounded guardsmen lay on stretchers, and the pervasive silence within the sisters' null aura was starkly contrasted by the panicked whispers and desperate prayers of the keep's inhabitants just beyond their immediate sphere of influence. A high-ranking tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Archmagos, Kyber Vorn, rushed forward, his many servo arms clicking and whirring, his augmetic eyes wide with alarm. He had been attempting to study the nature of the corruption, but his efforts were yielding nothing but despair. The machine spirits. My Lord Baron, they are screaming, not merely corrupted, but tortured. It is a violation of the highest order, a blasphemy against the Omnissiah. He gestured wildly at a captured, inert knight preceptor, secured by thick adamantium chains within a heavily reinforced bunker. Its plasma reactor pulsed erratically, and the air around it shimmered with residual malevolence. We cannot comprehend it. The sacred rituals, the canticles of activation, the litany of maintenance, they fail. The machine spirit of indomitable will has turned. It tried to sever its own throne mechanicum, to crush its own pilot within the cockpit. It is an abomination. Valerius approached the imprisoned knight, her null field pressing against the lingering psychic miasma around it. Even for her, the sensation was profound. It wasn't just a physical presence. It was a deeply ingrained spiritual torment. The machine spirit, a complex weave of artificial intelligence and reverence, was unraveling, being twisted into a grotesque parody of itself. This was not the simple mind control of a demon or the subtle influence of a psyker. This was something that consumed the very faith of the machine, turning its devotion into a weapon of self-destruction. This was a psychic plague that purified by destroying, that made the machine spirit commit atrocities against itself and its master, driven by a hunger that transcended mortal comprehension. Valerius knew then that her mission would not merely be a battle, but an exorcism of the most profound and terrifying kind. The grand council chambers of House Varus, once resplendent with the banners of countless victories and the holographic displays of strategic conquests, now felt like a crypt. Dust motes danced in the gloom, illuminated by the flickering emergency lumens, casting long, distorted shadows across the faces of the remaining Varus nobility and their senior officers. The air was thick with despair, recrimination, and a pervasive, gnawing fear. Lord Baron Theron Varus sat at the head of the ancient obsidian table, his posture stiff, but his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Beside him stood Commander Valerius Kale, a silent, unyielding pillar of black armor. Her presence, a living void, silenced the usual squabbles and desperate arguments that had plagued the council for days. Even the most volatile of the Varus nobles found their voices catch, their minds subtly unsettled by the absolute nullity she projected. We face an enemy unlike any before, Lord Baron Theron began, his voice raspy, echoing in the unnaturally quiet chamber. Our knights, our loyal defenders, have turned against us. Our pilots are either dead or driven to madness. Even the machine spirits are tainted. He swept a hand across the assembled faces. Some among you whisper of heresy, of a warp-born curse. Others claim Xylos perfidy. And some, I know, believe we are simply lost. Indeed, the divisions within House Varus were stark and growing. Lady Sarah Varus, a fiery-haired distant cousin and respected knight commander, rose, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. This is a corruption from within, Lord Baron. The warp has seeped into our very foundations. We must enact the sacred rituals of purification, burn the tainted knights, and cast out the weak-willed who allowed this corruption to take root. Her gaze swept accusatorily towards a group of younger nobles, some of whom had recently lost their knights to the plague. "Burn our sacred knights?" retorted Sir Gideon Varus, a veteran pilot who had narrowly escaped his own Night Warden when its machine spirit had tried to crush him. "This is not heresy, Lady Sarah. It is a sickness, a Xylos plague, perhaps, or some forgotten archaeotech weapon awakened. Our ancestors faced such horrors on the frontier. We must understand it, not merely destroy what we do not comprehend." His hand went instinctively to his unscarred, but still twitching, right arm, where the ghost of a neural feedback surge still lingered. The arguments raged, a pathetic display of a house fracturing under existential pressure. The Sisters of Silence, impassive and unmoving, observed the chaos with cold detachment. Valerius had ordered her sisters to spread throughout the keep, their null auras providing vital, if temporary, relief to the beleaguered defenders, allowing them moments of clarity amidst the psychic onslaught. They patrolled the halls, their silent presence a stark warning to any unseen entity that might be attempting to seep into the minds of the survivors. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, his servo arms clicking nervously, finally intervened, his amplified voice cutting through the bickering. "Cease this unproductive squabble. The Silent Sisters are here. Their presence alone proves the psychic nature of this blight, and I, with my instruments, confirm it. The machine spirits are not possessed by demons, nor are they simply malfunctioning. Their internal logic, their very faith, has been twisted by an external, malevolent psychic force. It is a corruption, yes, but not of the flesh, nor the warp in the conventional sense. It is an unbinding." He turned his optical sensors towards Valerius, a flicker of something akin to awe in his augmetic eyes. "Commander Kale, your insight is vital. Your order understands the subtleties of psychic phenomena in ways we cannot. What is the nature of this enemy? Can your sisters truly purge a machine spirit? Valerius, through the sister translator, conveyed her assessment. The plague is ancient. It preys on the sacred bond, the reverence for the machine. It does not possess, it redefines. It turns devotion into madness, the pilot's link into a weapon against them. The machine's spirit is suffering, its core directives rewritten by a malevolent will. Our null fields sever the connection, but they do not cure the underlying malady. To purge requires more than negation. It requires understanding the root. Her words, relayed without inflection, but with absolute certainty, brought a chilling quiet to the chamber. The concept of an entity that could rewrite the very faith of a machine spirit was terrifying. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was a spiritual one. But how? Whispered one of the younger nobles, his face pale. How does one fight an enemy that attacks the soul of a machine, that turns its very reverence into a tool of destruction? Valerius's gaze was unwavering. She knew that simply fighting the corrupted knights would be a never-ending, Pyrrhic battle. They could destroy them, yes, but the source of the plague would remain, consuming Xylos Prime piece by piece, spreading its insidious corruption. They needed to do more than fight the symptoms. They needed to find the source. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, ever the pragmatic seeker of knowledge, despite his current distress, seemed to grasp the implication. The root, the source. Commander Kael speaks truth. We have searched our records for anomalies, for forgotten dangers. There are legends, ancient tales of shadow echoes that predated even the first human settlements, emanating from the deepest geological strata of Xylos Prime. We dismissed them as pre-imperial superstitions. But if this blight is truly ancient, Lord Baron Theron, invigorated by a flicker of purpose, slammed a fist on the table. Then we delve into those legends. We scour our archives. We consult every lore keeper, every tech priest. Find the source, our knights, our house. We cannot let this abomination consume us entirely. The fragmented House Varus, for a moment, found a tenuous thread of unity in this new, desperate purpose. The Silent Sisters would not just be frontline warriors. They would be spiritual detectives, their unique abilities indispensable in navigating the psychic labyrinth that had become Xylos Prime. Valerius knew that the true battle lay not just on the battlefield, but deep within the planet's forgotten history, and within the very essence of the machine spirits they sought to save. Their purpose was clear: to find the Tsar of the Blight. and silence its ancient, hungry whisper forever. But the cost, she knew, would be immense. The revelation of the plague's ancient origins, though terrifying, offered a desperate glimmer of direction for the beleaguered House Varos. With Commander Valerius Kyle's confirmation that the malevolence was not merely warp-born, but an entity that redefined the machine spirit's faith, Archmagos Kyber Vorn immediately set his remaining tech priests to scouring the deep archives of the Varus Keep. These were not the common historical logs, but the forbidden, dust-laden data crypts, containing archaeological scans and geological surveys that predated even the Imperium's arrival on Xylos Prime. The Sisters of Silence, meanwhile, continued their patrols, extending their null auras through the keep's labyrinthine corridors, providing crucial pockets of clarity for the overwhelmed defenders. Their presence alone deterred nascent psychic influences, causing moments of internal strife or paranoia to dissipate, replaced by a cold, unsettling emptiness. Yet, Valerius noted, the deeper systemic corruption remained, a background hum of malignancy that even their combined anti-psychic presence could only dull, not eradicate. Valerius herself spent hours in the presence of the captive, Knight Preceptor, indomitable will. She stood before its massive, inert form, her senses stretched to their limits. The knight, restrained by a web of adamantium chains and power dampeners, pulsed with an almost physical agony. Its machine spirit, even without a pilot, was a maelstrom of conflicting directives, the hallowed oaths of House Varos warring with the insidious, rewritten commands of the plague. Valerius perceived it not as a thought, but as a feeling, a roaring, silent scream of violated sanctity, a profound blasphemy against its own existence. It was attempting to self-destruct, to tear itself apart, not out of malice, but out of sheer, unendurable spiritual torment. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, his augmetics whirring with renewed purpose, occasionally joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. He presented her with the initial findings from the deep archives. "Commander," he voxed, his voice carefully modulated to avoid startling her. "The records speak of a geological anomaly, an impact crater of immense size, buried beneath kilometers of strata, predating the planet's atmospheric genesis as we understand it. Ancient, strange energy signatures are still detected, even through the geological overburden." The Archmagos displayed a holographic projection, a vast subterranean void, impossibly smooth and unnaturally dark, at the planet's core. Pre-imperial, possibly Xylos in origin, our original colonization surveys dismissed it as a unique geological formation, perhaps a colossal meteoroid impact that created a perfectly spherical cavity. But the energy signatures, they are anomalous, non-thermal, non-radiological, almost anti-energetic. Your presence nearby seems to intensify the readings, Commander, as if your null field is irritating it. Valerius gazed at the holographic projection, her mercury eyes reflecting the cold, alien void. An anti-energetic signature reacting to her null field. The implications were chilling. She had encountered such things before, echoes of ancient Citan shards, or the lingering spiritual detritus of old One weaponry that could warp reality itself. This wasn't merely a source of psychic power. It was a source of anti-life, a negation that could twist the very essence of thought and being. Further archival searches yielded more disturbing data. Ancient Pict scrolls, barely decipherable, showed primitive, pre-Varus planetary cultures depicting strange, geometric patterns radiating from the Earth, and grotesque, fragmented images of men turning on their own tools, their weapons consuming them. The term, the unbinding, appeared repeatedly, accompanied by a symbol, a broken cog, its teeth twisted inward. The pieces clicked into place for Valerius. The plague was not a conventional psychic virus that infected minds. It was a malevolent psychic resonance emanating from this ancient source that redefined relationships. It corrupted the bond between pilot and machine, between man and his tools, twisting the natural reverence and obedience into self-destructive madness. The machine spirits, which held a primal, almost childlike faith in their pilots and the Omnissiah, were particularly vulnerable. Their devotion, when redirected by the unbinding, became a horrifying instrument of their own torment. They turned on themselves, their pilots, and their loyal brethren, because the plague had rewritten their fundamental understanding of loyalty. It hadn't possessed them. It had re-educated them through spiritual agony, convincing them that destruction was the true path to sacred devotion. This unbinding, Valerius communicated via sister translator, gesturing towards the holographic void. It seeks to sever all bonds, to twist all devotion. It aims for ultimate entropy, a nihilistic, psychic void. Archmagos Kyber Vorn shuddered, his data ports flickering. A blasphemy. The Omnissiah demands disorder, purpose, connection. To unbind is to deny all creation. The Archmagos then produced a series of ancient planetary cartographs, cross-referenced with the peculiar energy readings. The source, he concluded, lay deep beneath the planetary capital, directly beneath the most ancient sector of the Varus Keep itself. A forgotten subterranean vault, sealed for millennia, seemed to be the epicenter of the anomalous energies. It was directly beneath a forgotten crypt, an area that had been declared unstable and sealed off for centuries. The whispers from Xylos Prime, Valerius conveyed, using the initial distress call's self-given name. It is not a whisper, but a silent scream. A scream of unbinding from the very core of this world. It is time to descend. The objective was clear. They had to reach the core of the blight, this unbinding entity. Conventional weapons would be useless against a spiritual and psychic entity of such ancient power. They needed something more, something that could sever its influence, not just destroy its physical manifestation. Valerius knew that the Silent Sisters were uniquely equipped for this, but even their collective null aura might not be enough. They would need a weapon, an anathema specifically designed to unravel this particular, terrifying form of psychic corruption. Their journey would now shift from survival to the desperate forging of an anti-weapon, one that could fight a spiritual war within the very heart of the machine. The fate of Xylos Prime, and perhaps other night worlds, depended on it. The understanding of the plague's true nature, the unbinding, brought a chilling clarity to Commander Valerius Kyle. It was not merely about wiping out corrupted knights. It was about confronting an ancient nihilism that sought to unravel the very fabric of loyalty and devotion, a force that turned the sacred bond between man and machine into an engine of self-destruction. This knowledge solidified the grim resolve of the Silent Blades, but it also underlined the profound, esoteric challenge ahead. Their conventional methods of psychic suppression, while effective at severing immediate influence, could not cure the deep spiritual sickness twisting the machine spirits. Valerius returned to the observation bunker where the captured Knight Preceptor, Indomitable Will, was held. Its shuddering and groaning had intensified even within the null aura projected by several dedicated sisters. Archmagos Kyber Vorn was there, poring over diagnostic readouts projected from servo skulls, his augmetic eyes wide with a mix of dread and scientific fascination. "Commander," the Archmagos voxed, his voice filled with urgency. "The machine spirit is tearing itself apart. Its core programming, its loyalty directives, are in a state of terminal schism. It is fighting itself, trying to obey its primary programming of devotion, but the unbinding forces it to betray that very devotion. It is pure torment." Valerius stepped closer to the colossal war machine, her null field pressing against the invisible wall of spiritual anguish emanating from it. She extended a hand, not to touch the ceramite, but to feel the psychic imprint. What she perceived was a horrifying tableau. The knight's machine spirit, a complex symphony of loyalties, oaths, and the sacred code of the Omnissiah, was being systematically unpicked. Each thread of its devotion, its reverence for its pilot, its house, and its god machine, was being stretched, warped, and then violently snapped, only to be rebraided into a new, horrific paradigm where self-destruction and betrayal were heralded as ultimate fealty. The unbinding was a lie whispered into the soul, so profound that it shattered identity. It is a defilement of faith, Valerius communicated through the sister translator. The entity does not demand servitude. It demands nothingness. The Archmagos's many servo arms clicked in agitation. The sheer malevolence of such an act. To force a machine spirit to commit patricide against its own principles. It is a theological horror beyond my understanding. He paused, his optical sensors focusing on Valerius. But you understand the mechanism of it, Commander. You feel the psychic currents. Can we reverse it? Valerius shook her head slowly. To reverse is to recreate the severed bonds. We are instruments of severance, of silence. We can cut the threads, but we cannot reweave them. Not for a machine spirit. Then what hope do we have? Kyber Vorn's voice was tinged with despair. If even the Emperor's silence cannot heal, then Xylos Prime is lost. It was then that Valerius, in a rare, almost unprecedented move, articulated a solution, not through her translator, but through a sequence of complex, esoteric gestures known only to the highest echelons of the sisterhood. It was a language that spoke of ancient psychic warfare, of forbidden knowledge, and of the ultimate price of victory. The sister translator, visibly shaken, paused, then slowly, carefully translated. We cannot reweave, the translator conveyed, her voice strained. But we can burn. Burn the corruption without burning the spirit. Purify with absolute negation. She continued, describing a concept that was both terrifying and brilliant. A complete, instantaneous, and localized psychic void. A miniature black hole of anti-psychic energy, focused directly upon the core of a corrupted machine spirit. It would be an anathema so absolute that it would eradicate the unbinding's influence without necessarily destroying the spirit itself, though it would leave it utterly raw, emptied, and silent. Archmagos, Kyber Vorn's augmetic eyes widened further, his data slates whirring frantically. A psychic cauterization. but the sheer energy required, the precision, the risk. It could incinerate the machine spirit entirely, leaving naught but a shell. The cost of purity is absolute, Valerius's gesture indicated. But it is the only way to sever the unholy communion without destroying the vessel. It will require a ritual of focused null energy, amplified, channeled, something beyond a single sister, or even a vigil. The Archmagos was already calculating, his mind racing. The process, the focal point. It would need a nexus, a conduit capable of focusing such raw, anathemic power, and a method to deliver it without annihilating the operator. He looked at Valerius with a renewed, desperate hope. There is a theory, an archaeotech relic within the deepest vaults of the keep. A forgotten device, a psychic resonator, rumored to have been used by a lost Martian sect in the age of technology to tune machine spirits. We always believed it a fanciful myth. Its energy signature, too. Chaotic. But if attuned to an anti-psychic frequency, Valerius merely nodded, her gaze fixed on the tormented night. The plan was taking shape. The sisters would be the conduit, their combined null auras focused through the psychic resonator. They would create a localized, targeted negation field, a blast of pure silence designed to scour the unbinding from the machine spirit, leaving it empty but intact. The next few days were a blur of frantic preparation. Archmagos Kyber Vorn and his loyal tech priests worked tirelessly, guided by the sisters' cryptic gestures and the urgent pressure of the unfolding planetary siege. They located the ancient vault, breaking through millennia-old adamantium seals to retrieve the psychic resonator. It was a device of unsettling beauty, a polished orb of unknown, dark metal, surrounded by humming energy conduits and inscribed with symbols that predated the Imperium. Its very presence seemed to warp the air, vibrating with a chaotic, suppressed energy. Meanwhile, the Sisters of Silence prepared themselves. This wasn't a physical battle. It was an act of focused, controlled psychic negation on a scale they rarely attempted. It would draw deeply on their anti-psychic reserves, leaving them vulnerable and drained. A special anathema chamber was prepared, its walls reinforced with every known psychic dampening material. The first attempt at purification was agonizing. A loyalist night pilot, Sir Jaron Varus, a young noble racked with guilt over his brother's corruption, volunteered his night preceptor, Sentinel of Varus, which had begun to show the first insidious signs of the unbinding. It was a valiant, desperate act. Valerius Cale with a core group of her most powerful sisters, vigilant, surrounded the psychic resonator. As the ancient device was activated, its orb pulsed with a dark, hungry light. The sisters began their silent canticles, their null auras converging, compressing, and then focusing into a blinding, silent spear of anti-psychic energy directed at Sentinel of Varus. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The knight bucked and screamed, not with mechanical anguish, but with a horrifying, non-corporeal shriek that echoed only in the minds of those psychers unfortunate enough to be within a light year of Xylos Prime. The machine spirit thrashed, its internal systems overloading, its ceramite plating cracking under the immense, unseen pressure. Sparks flew, conduits ruptured, and the air filled with the stench of ozone and scorched metal. The psychic resonator flared, its dark orb threatening to explode. Valerius and her sisters gritted their teeth, pouring every ounce of their anathemic strength into the focus. They felt the psychic resistance of the unbinding recoil violently, lashing out, attempting to shatter their will. It was like wrestling with a void, a spiritual black hole that threatened to consume them entirely. Then, with a final, earth-shattering tremor, the night went utterly still. The resonator powered down, its dark orb now inert. The air around Sentinel of Varus was utterly silent, devoid of any psychic presence, any hum of a machine spirit. The night was a husk, its systems dead, its spirit scoured clean, but also utterly gone. The process had worked, in a sense, but at an unacceptable cost. Sir Jarin Varus, still strapped into his throne mechanicum, was found unresponsive, his mind empty, his spirit irrevocably linked to the annihilated machine spirit. A ghost. The victory, if it could be called that, was Pyrrhic. The unbinding had been purged, but the knight was dead, its pilot a living monument to the cost. Valeria surveyed the devastation, her face grim. They had learned the method, but the sacrifice was too great. They had to refine it, to find a way to sever the parasite without killing the host. The unholy communion had been broken, but the price had been the very soul of the machine. The true battle, she knew, was yet to come, and the cost would likely be far greater than any of them could imagine. The failed purification of Sentinel of Varus cast a heavy pall over the Varus keep. The empty husk of the night, its ceramite plating cracked, its internal systems fused, stood as a stark monument to the terrifying power of the unbinding and the brutal cost of even a partial victory. Sir Jaren Varus, the loyal pilot, was now a vacuous shell, his eyes staring blankly, his mind wiped clean by the sheer, annihilating force of the psychic cauterization. The sisters had cleansed the corruption, but at the price of the machine spirit and its pilot's soul. Commander Valerius Kale stood over the ruined knight for long hours, her mind interlink, replaying the agonizing sequence of events. The sheer force required to sever the unbinding had ripped the machine spirit out entirely, leaving a void. The psychic resonator, while powerful, was a blunt instrument. It had done its job, but without subtlety. They had eradicated the sickness, but also the patient. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, his servo arms drooping in despair, joined her, his metallic voice laced with defeat. Commander, the casualty rate is unacceptable. To save the loyal knights, we would destroy them. We would leave House Varos with an armada of silent, soulless automatons. A victory of ashes. Valerius, in her stoic manner, gestured. Her intent was clear. This was not a defeat, but a learning experience. They had pushed back the ice, unbinding, however violently. They had identified the core issue, the anti-energetic signature of the ancient entity at the planet's core was too powerful, its hold too pervasive. Their null fields, while potent, were like trying to hold back a tsunami with a single shield. They needed to understand the source of the tsunami, to predict its currents, to find its weakness. The ancient site, Valerius's translator articulated, beneath the keep, the core of the blight. It is from there that the unbinding emanates. We must understand it, not just destroy its projections. This meant delving deeper into the archaic lore, the forgotten histories that Archmagos Vorn's tech priests had barely begun to scratch. The keep's deep archives, beyond the data crypts they had already scoured, contained a section known only as the Vault of Whispers. It was a place sealed millennia ago, not due to danger, but due to the unsettling nature of its contents. Pre-imperial archaeological records, unverified Xylos theories, and the philosophical ramblings of an ancient, heretical sect that had once existed on Xylos Prime before the Imperium's arrival. Retrieving these records was a perilous task. The deeper layers of the keep were already showing signs of the unbinding's influence. Machine spirits of servitors and automated defense systems flickered erratically, and the air was thick with the palpable dread that seeped even into the sisters' null auras. Loyal. Varus guardsmen, though temporarily shielded by the sisters, were stretched thin, fighting off corrupted servitors and the occasional maddened tech priest whose implants had turned him against his brethren. A small contingent of sisters, led by Sister Vigilant Saria, accompanied Archmagos Vorn and a handful of his most trusted and heavily shielded tech priests into the Vault of Whispers. The vault was not large, but it was dense with information, packed with archaic data slates, crystalline memory drives of unknown provenance, and ancient, crumbling parchment scrolls. The air inside was still and cold, heavy with the dust of ages and the faint, unsettling echo of forgotten thoughts. As the sisters spread out, their null auras pushing back the ambient psychic pressure, Archmagos Vorn began the painstaking process of interfacing with the ancient data conduits. It was a delicate, dangerous operation, as many of the systems were partially corrupted, their machine spirits warring with unseen influences. Hours passed in silent, tense labor. Then, a breakthrough. One of Archmagos Vorn's servo skulls projected a series of images onto the grimy wall. Not picked feeds of current events, but ancient, distorted schematics and philosophical texts. The sisters, though unable to read the archaic script, could discern the recurring patterns, geometric symbols of severance, illustrations of energy fields that tore at the fabric of reality, and haunting depictions of a cosmic entity. It is a Catan shard. Archmagos Vorn's voxcaster crackled, his voice a mixture of horror and grim affirmation. Or the essence of one, a being of pure energy, a star god, one of the ancient, terrible entities that devoured stars and enslaved entire races in the dawn of time. The images solidified the terrifying truth. The text spoke of a whispering star, a fragment of a Catan, perhaps the outsider or the deceiver that had crashed on Xylos Prime untold millennia ago. It hadn't sought to devour souls in the conventional sense, but rather to undo them, to unbind all connections, all thoughts, all matter itself, transforming it into absolute nothingness, a perfect void. This was the entity known as the Unbinding, or by the older Xylos-influenced texts, the Nihilist. It fed on severance, Archmagos Vorn explained, his voice hushed. It drew strength from the breaking of bonds, the unraveling of loyalty, the destruction of faith. It learned to manipulate the connection between beings, to redefine their purpose, to turn devotion into a weapon of self-destruction. The machine spirits, with their deep, almost primal faith in the Omnissiah and their pilots, were its perfect prey. To twist such unwavering loyalty into its opposite. That is its ultimate hunger. The ancient texts spoke of a primeval war, long before mankind, when the Old Ones and their enslaved species had battled the Necrons and their Catan masters. Xylos Prime, it seemed, was a battleground. And this particular Catan shard had been imprisoned, its power contained by an intricate psychic dampening field and a series of Xenos tech stasis generators, meant to starve it of the severance energy it craved. Over millennia, the containment had weakened, the stasis generators had begun to fail, and the Catan shard's malign influence, its unbinding energy, had begun to seep out. The psychic resonator, the device they had used, was not of Imperial make. It was an ancient Xenos-human hybrid technology designed by those who had sought to study and perhaps even weaponize the Citan's abilities. It could amplify and focus psychic energy, or, in the sister's hands, anti-psychic energy. It was a tool of immense power, but also immense danger. The truth was laid bare. They were not fighting a psychic plague, but a dormant star god, a Khitan shard awakening from its long slumber, consuming the very essence of Xylos Prime from within. Its method was subtle, insidious, a corruption of the soul rather than a mere infection of the mind, and it desired not conquest, but absolute, terrifying entropy. Valerius Kyle looked at the images of the broken cog, the symbol of the unbinding. The purpose was no longer just to destroy the corrupted knights, but to confront the very source of this cosmic nihilism. And to do that, they would need more than bolters and null fields. They would need a ritual of such absolute, focused silence that it could silence even the hungry whisper of a star god, severing its connection to the material realm without destroying the planet itself. The cost of such an endeavor would be immense, a sacrifice of the purest and most profound kind. For how could one silence the nihilist without becoming nothing oneself? The revelation that Xylos Prime harbored a dormant Catan shard, the entity of the unbinding or the nihilist, sent a fresh wave of dread through the Varus keep. This was a foe of cosmic scale, an ancient, malevolent intelligence that predated humanity, a star god whose hunger was for the very essence of existence, for severance and entropy. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, despite his technological prowess, was visibly shaken by the sheer theological horror of fighting such a being. The very thought of it twisted the sacred tenets of the Omnissiah. Commander Valerius Kale, however, felt a grim satisfaction. The unknown was always the most terrifying. Now, with the enemy identified, a concrete path, however perilous, lay before them. They were not fighting a plague, but a hungry, ancient god. And against gods, humanity had always found a way, usually through cunning, sacrifice, and the deployment of weapons that defied mortal understanding. Their immediate task was to refine the anti-weapon, the psychic resonator, to purge the C'tan's influence without destroying the machine spirit entirely. The Archmagos, driven by a desperate surge of innovation and a righteous fury against the blasphemy of the unbinding, began to delve into more forbidden texts within the vault of whispers. He sought not just descriptions of the C'tan, but records of how they were fought, how they were contained. One such discovery was a fragmentary account, a series of schematics and cryptic philosophical musings from an obscure Xylos species that had once flourished in the sector, long since wiped clean by either the Necrons or the Imperium. These texts described a method of spiritual isolation, a way to sever the mental connection between a C'tan shard and its victims without annihilating the victim's consciousness. It spoke of a frequency, a resonance that could create a localized, absolute void, not of destruction, but of separation. It was akin to excising a tumor without damaging the surrounding organ, a precision strike against the very unbinding effect. It requires a highly focused, highly specific anti-psychic frequency, Archmagos Vorn explained to Valerius, his augmetic eyes glowing with renewed hope as he projected complex diagrams. The resonator, as a Xynos-human hybrid, has the theoretical capacity for such fine-tuning. We must create a localized pocket of perfect nothingness around the corrupted machine spirit, just long enough to disrupt the C'tan's influence, but not long enough to tear the spirit out by its roots. This was easier said than done. It required not only a precise calibration of the resonator, but also an unprecedented level of control and focus from the sisters. The previous attempt had been a blunt hammer. This would need to be a surgeon's scalpel. It would demand absolute mental and spiritual discipline, a perfect synchronization of their collective null auras, woven into a singular, focused point. Valerius chose her most experienced sisters for this refined technique, those whose null fields were the most potent and controllable. Sister Vigilant. Saria, her second in command, was among them. They spent days in a heavily warded chamber, meditating in their terrifying silence, honing their anathemic abilities, learning to compress and direct their anti-psychic energies with surgical precision. Archmagos Vorn modified the resonator, adding intricate dampening fields and focusing coils, turning the unstable artifact into a precision instrument. Their next test subject was a severely damaged, knight-errant, valiant blade, which had been recovered barely intact after its pilot, a young noblewoman, had miraculously ejected before the machine spirit completely succumbed. Its internal systems still hummed with the faint, insidious energy of the unbinding, a low, unsettling thrum. This time, the preparation was meticulous. The knight was secured in a specialized anathema chamber, isolated from all other life and machinery. Valerius and her chosen sisters surrounded the newly refined psychic resonator. The air grew heavy, the silence deepening to an almost unbearable pressure as their combined null auras merged. The resonator's dark orb began to pulse, not with the chaotic energy of before, but with a rhythmic, controlled beat. Then, at Valerius's silent command, the focused anti-psychic wave was unleashed. It was not a blast, but a directed, highly localized implosion of psychic energy. A precise void that wrapped around the machine spirit of valiant blade. The knight shuddered violently, but this time there was no agonizing shriek, no overwhelming spiritual explosion. Instead, a series of rapid, staccato tremors ran through its massive frame. Its internal systems flickered, threatening to overload, then stabilized. The hum of the unbinding intensified for a terrifying moment, then abruptly ceased. A profound, almost peaceful silence descended upon the night. When the resonator powered down, its orb now emanating a faint, cool light, the sisters approached valiant blade with extreme caution. Archmagos Vorn's servo skulls swept the night with diagnostic beams. The results were astounding. The Satan's influence was gone. The unbinding had been severed. The machine spirit of valiant blade was still present, not screaming in torment, but quiet, almost dormant, like a deeply traumatized child. It was empty, yes, but not destroyed. It was a blank slate, capable of being reawakened, rebonded, retaught its sacred oaths. It worked, Archmagos Vorn voxed, his voice filled with incredulous relief. The machine spirit is quiescent, purified. It has lost its connection, its active consciousness, but its core integrity remains. It can be rebonded. It can be saved. The discovery was a monumental triumph amidst the despair. They had found a way to fight the Catan shard, not by destroying its victims, but by severing its insidious connection to them. It was a glimmer of hope, a flickering candle in the encroaching darkness. House Varus, for the first time in weeks, had a tangible weapon against the unbinding. However, Valerius knew this was just the first step. To save Xylos Prime, they would have to confront the Cetan Shard directly. The refined purification technique was for individual knights, a slow and arduous process. The source of the unbinding still pulsed deep beneath the keep, relentlessly spreading its nihilistic influence. They had found a way to treat the symptoms, but not to cure the disease at its root. The next phase would be the most dangerous, to descend into the maw of the nihilist itself, armed with their newfound, fragile knowledge. The cost would still be immense, perhaps greater than any one of them could bear. But now, at least, they had a fighting chance to truly silence the ancient whisper of the Star God. The partial success of purifying Valiant Blade offered a crucial, albeit fragile, morale boost to the beleaguered forces of House Varus. Yet, the respite was fleeting. The unbinding entity, stirred by the sisters' efforts, seemed to lash out with renewed fury. The psychic pressure on Xylos Prime intensified, becoming a pervasive, tangible dread that settled upon the planet like a shroud. The keep, despite the sisters' null auras, felt increasingly besieged, not just by physical attacks, but by an encroaching spiritual darkness. The Cetan Shard, sensing the threat to its insidious work, began to accelerate its corruption. No longer content with merely twisting individual machine spirits, it began to orchestrate a full-scale assault on the Varus Keep. The city outside, once a vibrant hub of industry and population, was now a battleground of madness. Scores of corrupted knights, their eyes glowing with unnatural malevolence, their machine spirits screaming silent hymns of entropy, converged on the fortress palace. Lord Baron Theron Varus, his face set in grim determination, ordered every available loyal knight and guardsman to the ramparts. "This is it," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of approaching war machines. "They seek to finish us, but House Varus will not break." The siege began with a horrifying symphony of destruction. Corrupted night wardens and crusaders, their heavy battle cannons and Avenger Gatlings, thundering, unleashed a deluge of fire against the keep's ancient walls. Plasma bolts vaporized sections of ferrocrete, melta-beams tore through defensive turrets, and seismic charges sent tremors through the very foundations of the fortress. The Varus loyalists returned fire with desperate ferocity, their loyal knights moving with practiced coordination, trying to hold back the tide of their maddened brethren. Commander Valerius Kale deployed her sisters strategically. Squads of witch-seekers, their executioner greatswords humming, bolstered the defenders on the walls, their null auras disrupting the precision of the corrupted knight's attacks. The Citan's influence on the machine spirits was partially negated within the sisters' immediate vicinity, causing the rogue knights to falter, their attacks becoming less coordinated, more frenzied, and desperate. This momentary hesitation bought precious seconds for the loyalist artillery to find its mark, or for a knight paladin to intercept an advancing enemy. However, the sheer numbers of the corrupted knights were overwhelming. Wave after wave of immense war machines, heedless of damage, slammed against the keep's outer defenses. A knight castellan, fury of Xylos, its twin plasma core now unstable and glowing with a sickly green light, charged a main gate, its powerful ceramite shield absorbing volley after volley of fire. Its titanic footfalls shook the ground, cracking the very foundations of the keep's outer walls. Inside the keep, the Archmagos, Kyber Vorn, shielded by a squad of sisters, worked frantically to activate secondary power generators and bring ancient, automated defense systems online. Even these machine spirits, however, were proving difficult to rouse, their loyalty wavering under the constant pressure of the unbinding. The keep itself seemed to groan, its ancient systems protesting the insidious corruption that seeped through its very structure. Valerius, from her vantage point atop the main tower, observed the unfolding catastrophe with cold precision. The purification technique, though viable, was too slow, too resource-intensive to stem this tide. Even if they purified every corrupted knight, the source would simply re-corrupt them. They were fighting a battle of attrition against an inexhaustible, ancient enemy. The source, Valerius communicated to her command team through gestures. We must strike at the core. Now. She knew that the Citan's full attention was currently on the siege. This was their narrow window of opportunity. While the entity focused its power on breaking the keep, its core might be momentarily vulnerable. Its influence spread thin across countless corrupted machines. Lord Baron Theron, exhausted but resolute, turned to Valerius. Commander, what is your counsel? We can hold for a time, but the walls will fall. Our knights are few. We cannot withstand this forever. Valerius's response was swift and definitive, articulated through the sister translator. The siege is a distraction. The true war is beneath us. I will lead a strike force to the source of the unbinding. We must sever its hold from the planet. Lord Baron Theron's eyes widened, recognizing the monumental risk involved. Beneath the keep, the ancient vaults, that is a journey into the dark heart of Xylos Prime itself. He knew that the deep levels of the keep were largely unexplored, filled with forgotten passages and crumbling infrastructure. They were also closest to the Citan Shard's resting place. "It is our only path to victory," Valerius confirmed. "While your loyal knights draw its attention, we will strike at its root." Archmagos Kyber Vorn, overhearing the exchange, immediately stepped forward. "I will accompany you, Commander. My knowledge of the keep's deep architecture, my instruments, they will be invaluable. And I must witness this blasphemy purged." Valerius nodded her acceptance. The Archmagos's technical expertise and his moral authority would be critical. She ordered a small, elite contingent of her sisters to prepare for immediate deployment into the deepest, darkest levels of the keep. They would carry the psychic resonator, now attuned and refined, along with specialized equipment designed for deep penetration. Above them, the keep shuddered again as a section of the outer wall finally gave way, collapsing in a cascade of ferrocrete and plasma fire. A gap had been breached. The corrupted knights bellowed their silent rage, pushing forward, their eyes burning with the Citan's cold hunger for entropy. Lord Baron Theron gripped the hilt of his power sword. "We will hold them, Commander. We will buy you the time you need. May the Emperor and the Omnissiah guide your blades." The final desperate gamble was set. While the loyal forces of House Varus fought a heroic, doomed last stand against their own twisted brethren above ground, Commander Valerius Kyle and her silent blades prepared to descend into the planet's core, into the very maw of the Citan Shard. Their objective? To sever the ancient evil's connection to Xylos Prime, to purge the unbinding from its heart, or perish in the attempt. The fate of the night world would be decided not on the battlements, but in the echoing, silent darkness beneath. The desperate, thundering clamor of the siege was a dwindling echo as Commander Valerius Kyle and her hand-picked strike force descended deeper into the forgotten underbelly of the Varus Keep. Their path wound through ancient maintenance tunnels, service conduits, long sealed off, and subterranean passages that had not seen the light of day for millennia. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, his servo arms clicking and whirring, navigated the labyrinthine depths with grim determination, his optical sensors cutting through the Stygian gloom. A small retinue of his most trusted tech priests followed, their heavy void shields shimmering, laden with power cells and diagnostic equipment for the psychic resonator. The atmosphere grew heavier with every meter they descended. The air became thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth, punctuated by the metallic tang of ancient, corroded machinery. Even within the sisters' null auras, the pervasive dread of the unbinding seeped into their very bones, a cold, hungry emptiness threatened to steal their breath. The deeper they went, the stronger the psychic pressure became, almost physical in its intensity, a constant drone of silent negation that scraped against the edges of Valerius's perception. They encountered automated defense systems, forgotten servitors, and repair drones that had been slumbering for centuries, now awakened and maddened by the Satan's influence. Their machine spirits, twisted beyond recognition, turned on the intruders with a relentless, suicidal ferocity. The sisters moved with ruthless efficiency, their bolters spitting death, their power swords severing circuits and hydraulic lines with grim precision. These were mere distractions, however, the Satan's lingering presence, probes seeking to hinder their advance. The route led them through a series of colossal subterranean caverns carved by ancient geological forces, or perhaps by something far more alien. Within these vast spaces, they saw evidence of the planetary capital's original infrastructure: colossal support pillars, forgotten power conduits, and vast, empty docks for subterranean transport vehicles that had long since rusted into skeletal husks. All of it now permeated by the insidious hum of the unbinding. Archmagos Vorn's instruments, which had remained strangely muted in the presence of the sisters' null auras, began to shriek with alarm. "Commander, we are nearing the epicenter. The anti-energetic readings are off the scale. The planetary core is suffused with the Cetan's influence." They entered a vast circular chamber, its walls adorned with indecipherable flowing glyphs and the stark, angular designs of Xylos architecture. In the center of the chamber stood a colossal, ornate plinth, and resting upon it, an object that defied conventional understanding. It was a shard, indeed, but not a mere fragment of metal. It was a shifting, obsidian crystal, impossibly black, that seemed to absorb all light, all sound, all essence around it. It pulsed with a cold, hungry light, its surface constantly rippling, as if vast, unknowable energies churned within. This was the Satan shard, the nihilist, the heart of the unbinding. Around the plinth, in a vast radial pattern, were the remnants of the ancient Xylos stasis generators, colossal, rusted pylons, their arcane machinery long dead, having failed after millennia. The sisters understood then. This was a prison, and its inmate was waking. The presence of the Satan shard was overwhelming, even for the sisters. Their null auras, which usually created a bubble of serene silence, now felt like an excruciating pressure, a constant struggle against an entity that sought to negate their very being. Valerius felt it most acutely, a profound, consuming emptiness that threatened to pull her consciousness into its own void. It was not pain, but the cessation of all sensation, the extinguishing of all thought, a horrifying promise of absolute nothingness. Suddenly, the shard pulsed, and from its surface, vague, shimmering forms began to coalesce. Not physical beings, but psychic manifestations, projections of the Cthulhu's will. They were amorphous, shifting shapes that seemed to twist the air around them, coalescing into distorted, mocking visages of House Varus knights, their forms rippling with a malevolent, silent laughter. These were the phantom echoes of the corrupted machine spirits, extensions of the Cthulhu's hunger, now aware of the intruders. "It knows we are here!" Archmagos Vorn's Voxcaster screeched, his tech priests raising their void shields defensively. "It is focusing its power. Prepare the resonator." The psychic phantoms of the knights solidified, becoming almost tangible, their spectral chainswords and thermal spears phasing through the air, leaving trails of chilling emptiness. They attacked, not with physical force, but with a pure psychic assault that would have shattered the minds of lesser beings. For the sisters, it was a battle against the very concept of being, a struggle against the nihility the Cthulhu sought to impose. Valerius, her face a mask of grim resolve, pushed back against the psychic assault, her null field flaring with raw, concentrated negation. She motioned to her sisters, her movements sharp, urgent. They immediately formed a defensive perimeter, their bolters spitting at the spectral forms, their executioner greatswords carving through the transient matter of the Cthulhu's projections. Meanwhile, a core group of sisters, including Sister Vigilant Seria, set up the psychic resonator near the plinth, the hum of its intricate machinery a fragile counterpoint to the terrifying silence emanating from the Cthulhu shard. Archmagos Vorn, his servo arms trembling, began to interface with the device, recalibrating it, preparing it for the momentous task ahead. Valerius engaged the largest of the phantoms, a spectral night castigator, its form a grotesque parody of Oathsworn, the first knight to succumb. Its psychic presence was immense, a focal point of the Unbinding's malevolence. Valerius met its spectral blows with her power sword, the weapon singing with an anathemic hum as it carved through the immaterial form. Each blow was not just a physical deflection, but a negation of the Cthulhu's will, a rejection of its nihilistic hunger. This was the true battle, not against flesh and blood, but against an ancient, cosmic horror that sought to devour existence itself. The sisters were holding the line, their very being a bulwark against the void, but Valerius knew they could not hold forever. The power of the Citan was immense. Its influence seeped into the very rock and metal of Xylos Prime. They had to activate the resonator. They had to deliver the ultimate silence, and they had to do it before the void consumed them all. This was the darkest hour, the confrontation with ultimate entropy, and the silent blades would meet it with the grim, unwavering resolve of those who walked in the cold embrace of the Emperor's true silence. The colossal chamber, once a prison for a star god, now served as its burgeoning tomb, and the desperate arena for the Sisters of Silence. The air, heavy with the Cataan's consuming silence, pressed down on Valerius Kyle and her vigil, threatening to crush their very will. The psychic phantoms of corrupted knights, birthed from the nihilists' malevolence, swirled and lunged, their immaterial weapons tearing at the sisters' defensive line. These were not mere illusions. They were concentrations of raw psychic negation, capable of draining life and logic from anything they touched. Valerius, at the forefront, met the onslaught with grim resolve. Her power sword, humming with anathemic energy, deflected blows that would have unmade lesser beings, its edge tearing through the spectral forms with savage precision. Each swing was a testament to her unwavering will, a physical manifestation of her order's purpose: to negate, to silence, to erase the horrors of the warp and the psychic realm. Her sisters fought like wraiths around her, their bolters spitting controlled bursts, their great swords carving paths through the shifting phantoms. They were fighting against an enemy that attacked their very existence, and every parry, every shot, every step forward was an act of profound defiance. Meanwhile, at the heart of the chamber, Archmagos Kyber Vorn and his tech priests worked frantically around the psychic resonator. The ancient orb pulsed erratically, its newly refined focusing coils struggling against the overwhelming psychic pressure emanating from the Citan shard. Sparks flew from exposed conduits, and the air around the Archmagos crackled with raw, unstable energy. His servo arms moved with incredible speed, connecting arcane cables, chanting guttural litanies of activation in binary. His augmented voice, usually calm and detached, was now edged with a desperate urgency. The resonator, it is fighting for activation, he voxed, his optical sensors flickering wildly. The Citan is actively resisting. It perceives the threat. Its unbinding frequency is attempting to disrupt the resonator's core matrix. Valerius saw the danger. The psychic phantoms were growing stronger, more numerous, their assaults becoming more coherent. The Satan, sensing their intent, was focusing its malevolence, trying to shatter their will before they could deliver the killing blow. One of her sisters, a null maiden named Ethel, was struck by a spectral knight's thermal spear. There was no physical wound, no blood, but her form flickered for a horrifying moment, her null field collapsing inward before her sisters dragged her back, forcing her aura back into coherence. The effect was a draining of her very essence, a touch of the nihilist's absolute void. "Hold the line," Valerius communicated through the sister translator, her tone an unyielding command. "Protect the resonator. We must sever the root." The sisters formed an unbreakable shield around the Archmagos and his vital work. Their collective null auras flared, pushing back the encroaching phantoms, creating a momentary bubble of almost absolute silence. But the effort was immense, draining their reserves with every passing second. They were fighting on multiple fronts, against the physical pressure of the Cthulhu's presence, against the psychic attacks of its projections, and against the crushing despair that threatened to overwhelm their resolve. Just as the defenses began to buckle, as the spectral knights pressed closer, threatening to overwhelm the tech priests, Archmagos Kyber Vorn gave a guttural cry of triumph. "Activated. The resonator is online, but it requires a focal point, a channel to direct its ultimate negation." He turned his augmetic eyes to Valerius, his gaze conveying a horrifying truth. The psychic resonator, despite its refinements, still needed a living conduit of anti-psychic energy, a powerful null to focus its annihilating power with the necessary precision. A sacrifice. Valerius did not hesitate. Her vow of silence was not just an oath to never speak, but an oath of ultimate devotion, of absolute sacrifice to the Emperor's will. She made a single, decisive gesture to Sister Vigilant Syria. Maintain the line. Protect the retreat. Then, without a backward glance, she plunged through the remaining spectral knights, her power sword singing a final, defiant hymn of negation, leaving shattered phantoms in her wake. She reached the psychic resonator, its dark orb humming with barely contained power. Archmagos Vorn, with a look of profound sorrow, opened a direct interface port on the device. Valerius, with practiced ease, connected her anathemic neural interface directly to the resonator's core. The surge of raw, anti-psychic energy was instantaneous and overwhelming. For a moment, the entire chamber was bathed in a blinding flash of negative light, a terrifying implosion of all energy, all thought, all being. Valerius Kale, the living void, became the ultimate conduit. her null field, amplified by the resonator and focused with her unparalleled will, became a spear of absolute silence, aimed directly at the Satan shard. The Satan shard shrieked, but it was not a sound heard with ears. It was a cosmic scream of ultimate agony that tore through the very fabric of reality. A silent roar of a god being undone. The obsidian shard writhed, its surface churning with unimaginable fury and pain. The psychic phantoms of the nights exploded into nothingness, dissipating like smoke. The oppressive silence of the chamber, which had been the Catan's dominion, was now Valerius's weapon, focused and wielded with devastating intent. Valerius felt the backlash, a maelstrom of raw, annihilating nihilism that slammed into her mind, threatening to tear her consciousness apart. The unbinding fought back with the desperation of a cornered god, attempting to consume her, to unmake her, to reduce her to less than nothing. She felt the ancient hunger of the Catan, its desire for ultimate entropy, seeking to overwhelm her with the promise of eternal non-existence. But Valerius was the embodiment of negation, a vessel of absolute silence. She met the void with a greater void, the hunger with an infinite emptiness. Her power armor groaned, its systems sparking, its internal temperature plummeting to unimaginable lows as the resonator channeled the force through her. Her physical form, though protected by ceramite and arcane tech, was assaulted by the very energies she wielded. Yet she held. Her will, honed by decades of silent warfare against the warp's abominations, was unbreakable. She pushed, pouring every last ounce of her being, her essence, her fundamental anti-psychic nature into the resonator. A final, monumental surge. The Satan shard flared one last time, a silent explosion of dying malevolence, then began to recede, to shrink, to implode into itself. Its connection to Xylos Prime, its pervasive, insidious influence, was being violently severed, torn from the planet's very core by the purest, most absolute form of negation. Valerius Kale stood at the precipice of oblivion, the ultimate sacrifice upon her lips, a silent scream of defiance against a star god's hunger. The darkest hour had come, and the silent blades would meet it with a silence that could truly unmake a god. The blinding flash of negative light that erupted from the psychic resonator, channeled through Commander Valerius Coil, tore through the ancient chamber. It was not a physical explosion, but an instantaneous implosion of all psychic energy, a super-concentrated void of anti-existence that slammed into the Catan shard, the star god's cosmic scream, unheard by mortal ears, but felt in the very fabric of reality, reached its terrifying crescendo. The obsidian shard, the heart of the nihilist, writhed and convulsed upon its plinth. Its constantly shifting surface flared with desperate, dying malevolence, attempting to lash out, to consume, to unmake the defiant sister who dared to challenge its ancient hunger. But Valerius Cael was an unyielding bulwark, a living void, matching the Cthulhu's emptiness with an even greater, more focused negation. She poured every last atom of her anti-psychic essence, every iota of her indomitable will, into the resonator. Her power armor groaned and protested, its systems failing, sparking, and then freezing solid as the ambient energy plummeted to absolute zero within her immediate vicinity. Frost bloomed across her ceramite, and the air around her shimmered with the painful distortion of reality. Internally, her augmented nervous system was overwhelmed, her senses pushed beyond breaking point by the sheer, annihilating backlash. The Cthulhu's final, desperate attempt to consume her mind was a torrent of pure entropy, a vision of absolute nothingness that threatened to extinguish her consciousness forever. But Valerius, for all her silence, was a force of utter defiance. She met the void, not with resistance, but with absorption, a complete and total rejection of the Cthulhu's influence. Around her, her sisters, reeling from the sudden, profound shift in psychic pressure, instinctively rallied. Sister Vigilant Saria, seeing Valerius consumed by the inferno of anti-energy, understood the sacrifice. She barked silent commands, directing her sisters to reinforce the null field around the resonator, feeding their own anti-psychic energies into the device, supporting their commander's ultimate act of defiance. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, his servo arms clamped onto the resonator's auxiliary power conduits, frantically rerouted energy, pushing the ancient device to its absolute limits, assisting in the ultimate purge. The climax was a profound act of spiritual severance, with a final, terrifying tremor that shook the foundations of the planet itself. The Cthulhu shard imploded, not into dust, but into pure, unadulterated nothingness. It was as if it had never existed. The vast, obsidian crystal, the ancient prison of the nihilist, was gone, erased. The sudden, absolute silence that followed was deafening. The oppressive dread that had permeated the chamber, the crushing pressure of the unbinding, vanished. It was replaced by an immense, almost holy emptiness, a profound void of psychic energy. The air became thin cold and utterly still. Then, Valerius Kyle collapsed. The psychic resonator, its purpose fulfilled, sputtered and died, its dark orb cracking, its intricate machinery seizing. Sister vigilant. Saria and her sisters rushed forward, carefully extracting their commander from the defunct device. Valerius was alive, barely. Her power armor was shattered, fused in places, coated in a thick layer of ice. Her skin, exposed in the gaps of her ruined armor, was deathly pale, veined with frost. Her mercury-like eyes were closed, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body. Her null field, usually a potent shield, was now barely a whisper, a flickering candle in the profound silence she had created. She had emptied herself, poured her very essence into the annihilation of a star god. Archmagos Kyber Vorn immediately deployed his Medici servitors, their delicate tools probing Valerius's vitals. His augmetic eyes scanned her, his diagnostic readouts struggling to comprehend her state. "She lives," he voxed, his voice laced with awe and concern. "But her essence, her very anti-psychic nature, it is profoundly diminished. She is a deeper silence." The other sisters, though physically unharmed, were visibly shaken. Their null auras were exhausted, their inner wells of anti-psychic energy depleted. The sheer exertion, the terrifying proximity to cosmic entropy had taken its toll. They had witnessed the unmaking of a god, and they had paid a heavy price. Above them, within the Varus keep, the effect of the Citan's annihilation was immediate and profound. The corrupted knights, still battering against the outer walls, suddenly faltered. The unnatural malevolence in their movements vanished, replaced by a momentary, confused stasis. The unbinding's hold was broken. Some knights simply powered down, their machine spirits released from torment into a profound, empty slumber. Others, their internal systems still damaged from the Citan's influence, began to malfunction, their weapons sputtering erratically before falling silent. The siege, which had seemed unstoppable moments before, abruptly ceased. The loyalist forces of House Varus, exhausted and on the verge of collapse, watched in stunned silence as their corrupted brethren simply stopped fighting. Lord Baron Theron Varus, witnessing the sudden cessation of hostilities, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. The psychic pressure on the planet lifted, replaced by a clean, albeit eerie, emptiness. The core of the blight was gone. Xylos Prime was saved, but the cost was immense. A star god was unmade, but the weapon used was broken, its conduit shattered. Commander Valerius Kale, the embodiment of the Emperor's silence, had paid the ultimate price, sacrificing her very being to bring ultimate silence to an ancient horror. The war was over, but the grim aftermath was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath of the Citan Shard's annihilation was a stark tableau of silence and devastation. The colossal chamber, once alive with the terrifying pulse of the nihilist, was now a dead space, cold and empty. Archmagos Kyber Vorn and his remaining tech priests worked with desperate haste, stabilizing Commander Valerius Kale, whose life now hung by a thread. Her power armor was a ruin, scorched by anti-energy and encrusted with ice, and her null field, once a beacon of absolute negation, was barely a flicker, a whisper of what it once was. Her mind, though purged of the C'tan's influence, was a shattered landscape, emptied and profoundly traumatized. Her sisters, themselves drained and exhausted, maintained a vigil around her, their presence a muted comfort, a promise of protection, even in their weakened state. The psychic resonator, the ancient anti-weapon, lay in pieces, its orb cracked, its intricate circuitry fused. It had served its purpose, but it was irrevocably broken. A relic now, not an instrument. Above ground, the sudden cessation of the C'tan's influence plunged Xylos Prime into a jarring, unnatural quiet. The corrupted knights, which moments before had been relentless engines of destruction, now stood motionless, scattered across the blasted landscape around the Varus Keep. Some simply powered down, their internal systems ceasing to function as their machine spirits, freed from the unbinding but utterly exhausted, slipped into a deep, indefinite slumber. Others, their systems critically damaged by the internal conflict, spasmed erratically before collapsing into inert heaps of ceramite and twisted metal. Lord Baron Theron Varus, cautiously venturing out from the keep's shattered gates with his remaining loyal knights, surveyed the devastation with a heavy heart. The planetary capital was a wasteland, its once proud spires and vibrant districts reduced to rubble. Countless loyal guardsmen lay dead, their sacrifice buying the precious time needed for the sisters to strike at the heart of the blight. The once magnificent azure and gold liveries of House Varus were now stained with grime, battle damage, and the chilling residues of psychic corruption. The loyal knights, though victorious, were profoundly scarred. Their pilots, many of whom had fought against their own kin, were emotionally and spiritually devastated. The bond with their machine spirits, though unbroken by the Citan, was strained. tainted by the memory of battling their maddened brethren. It would take years, perhaps generations, for House Varus to fully heal from the internal wounds of this conflict. Over the ensuing weeks, the sisters, slowly recovering their strength, began the arduous process of evaluating the remaining corrupted knights. With the Cataan's influence severed, the refined psychic resonator could not be rebuilt, but its principles had been understood. Archmagos Vorn, assisted by the recovered sisters, began developing a slower, less forceful method of purification, adapting the principles of focused null energy into a series of intricate rituals. This new method, though agonizingly slow, allowed the dormant, cleansed machine spirits of the knights to be slowly reawakened, purged of the unbinding, and eventually rebonded with new pilots, a long, painful process of rebirth for the venerable war machines. However, many knights were too far gone, their machine spirits too deeply scarred, too profoundly emptied to ever be truly reawakened. These silent titans, once proud defenders, would stand as grim reminders of the unbinding's power, their hollow cockpits forever empty. The economic devastation to Xylos Prime was catastrophic. The agri-domes were ruined, the orbital shipyards heavily damaged, and the population decimated. The proud House Varus, though it had survived, was broken, its power and influence shattered. It would take generations to rebuild, to regain a semblance of its former glory. Lord Baron Theron Varus initiated a planetary reconstruction, but his eyes held the haunted look of a man who had stared into the void and seen it stare back. He would spend the remainder of his life grappling with the moral compromises and immense sacrifices made to save his world. Valerius Kyle, meanwhile, remained in critical condition. She had saved Xylos Prime, but her own essence had been profoundly altered. Her null field, though active, was now muted, less aggressive, a deeper, more profound silence. She no longer radiated the potent, anti-psychic energy of a warrior, but the hollow stillness of a being that had absorbed the purest form of nihilism and survived. Her eyes, when they occasionally opened, held a terrifying depth, an echo of the absolute void she had unleashed. She had become something more and something less, a living monument to the ultimate sacrifice, a vessel of infinite emptiness, forever marked by her intimate confrontation with a star god. Her journey to bring silence had cost her her own vibrant, though silent, soul. The nullification's edge departed the Xylos Prime system as silently and ominously as it had arrived, leaving behind a scarred world slowly beginning the arduous process of rebuilding. The planet, once a vibrant jewel, was now a somber testament to a cosmic battle, its surface crisscrossed by the wounds of war, its sky often gray with atmospheric dust. House Varus, though diminished, had survived, clinging to a fragile hope for the future, but their glory was a memory, their power a shadow. The price of their salvation had been profound, paid in blood, loyalty, and the very souls of their cherished war machines. Commander Valerius Kale, carefully encased in a specialized stasis pod within the Nullification's Edge, Medicae Bay was the living embodiment of that grim victory. Her physical wounds had been mended by the Archmagos' Medici servitors and the advanced biotechnology of the sisters, but her psychic state was beyond mortal comprehension. Her null field, once a powerful, aggressive negation, was now a deep, resonant hum of absolute void. She was no longer merely immune to psychic forces. She had become an intrinsic part of the ultimate silence she had unleashed. Her consciousness, though present, was profoundly altered. A quiet echo in a vast, empty expanse. She had emptied herself to contain the nihilist, and that emptiness was now her eternal companion. She was the unbroken silence, a living paradox, forever marked by her confrontation with a star god. Her sisters of Athame, though still reeling from their ordeal, understood the profound sacrifice. Valerius Kale was no longer merely their commander. She was a living relic, a symbol of their order's ultimate purpose and the terrible cost of their anathemic power. Her empty presence was a constant, stark reminder that against the galaxy's most ancient and profound horrors, victory often came at the cost of one's very essence. Sister Vigilant. Saria assumed command of the vigil, her face a mask of grim determination, knowing that the shadow of Valerius's sacrifice would forever guide their blades. The legacy of the silent blades on Xylos Prime was complex. To the remaining loyalists of House Varus, they were saviors, grim angels who had descended from the void to purge a cosmic evil. Their silent presence had been a shield, their actions a terrifying, necessary surgery. Yet their methods, the destruction of revered machine spirits, and the profound, unsettling silence they embodied, ensured they would remain distant, revered, and slightly feared figures in the annals of Varus history. Archmagos Kyber Vorn, now a living legend for his instrumental role in creating the anti-weapon, dedicated his life to understanding and perfecting the new, slower purification rituals for the quiescent night machine spirits. He became a zealous advocate for increased imperial vigilance against such ancient, nihilistic threats. His augmetic mind forever haunted by the memory of the Catan and the silence of Valerius Cale. His work became a desperate race against time, a personal crusade to prevent another world from falling prey to an entity that sought to unmake the very foundations of the Omnissiah's reverence. The tale of Xylos Prime and the Unbinding became a whispered legend within the Collegia Titanica and the inner circles of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was a grim, cautionary tale of a terror that targeted not just flesh, but faith, not just minds, but the very souls of machines. It highlighted the fragile boundary between man and machine, and the insidious ways ancient evils could exploit those bonds. As the nullification's edge disappeared into the warp, its Geller field shimmering, Valerius Cale lay in her stasis pod, a profound, almost absolute silence emanating from her. She had silenced a star god, brought an end to an ancient entity of cosmic nihilism. She had saved a night world, but in doing so, she had become a living void, a quiet echo of the vast emptiness she had embraced. Her legacy was not one of roaring triumph, but of profound, eternal silence. In the grim darkness of the far future, where hope was but a flickering candle, and every victory came at an unbearable cost, Valerius Cale stood as a testament to the ultimate sacrifice, a warrior who had embraced the void to protect what little light remained. The Emperor's silence, she had proven, was absolute, but its cost was often the silence of the soul itself.